Dobro jutro. That's it. That's all. I managed actually 4 pages of Slovenian and dobro jutro. That's it. So please forgive me for presenting in English. But believe me, I will be back. The Slovenian language and the people are so warm, and you can't but help to come back. And the thing that I found most interesting, because I've been here several days because of travel, is not the most easy to get to Slovenia from California, is that everyone is pulling in the same direction. Everyone is unified, and everyone wants the best for their family, their children, their clients. So today, what we're going to be speaking throughout the entire conference is something that we all have in common: daylight and darkness. Because when we think of daylight, we often also have to include darkness, because that is what makes us human and keeps us Slovenian, Croatian, wherever part of the country of the world we're from. That's who we are, and that's how we got here. So today I'm going to give you an overview of daylight from a medical and scientific and biological perspective. After all, we are human. We're all the same. On autopsy, when I look at an individual, we're all the same inside. And we have one brain and one body, and it responds the same based on your age. So when we're designing projects, we need to consider the average age of the people going in, because the light requirements are changing. But for architects and engineers and computer analysis who are doing the BIM and the radiance, you all need to understand this as well, so that you can catch some anomalies before you're going into the actual design, development, and construction phases of your projects. So I'm going to be giving you the basics of daylight and explaining it in a way that many of you may have not ever heard before. So I've used the word dynamic daylight. And it's dynamic because it's constantly, continually changing, giving us unconscious cues for upcoming weather and visual time cues. If I were to ask you what time of day this image is, you would all come up with the same. And as an architect and designer, you use the dynamics of daylight to excite the project, to create shadow and movement and motion within your space and make your buildings memorable and alive. But architecture is more than just a building. It's about the people who live and work and spend their entire livelihood of energy within that building. We spend over more than 90% of our time indoors. 40% of all of our diseases we can't do anything about. They're genetic or familial based, but 60% of all of our diseases and health concerns are derived directly from the environment. But yet, as a whole, our profession of architecture, we're not really 100% sure of what daylight is. So I'm going to give you some definitions right now and some ideas of how daylight is maybe different than what you thought. Because daylight is responsible for ensuring all life forms on Earth with the energy that's necessary to survive, thrive, and reproduce. I bet you never heard talking and linking sex with daylight before. Yeah. So why daylight? Well, because the transition or photoperiod between night and dark is a 24-hour rhythm that's determined by the rotation of the Earth. And it determines our reproductive system, our maturation, our development, and physiological function of all life forms, whether you're an amoeba or a tree or a fish or a human. Everyone has a dependency on the cycle between light and dark and the dynamics contained within the light itself. And we know this because of the photometrics and the physics involved. If we're looking at daylight as purely a scientific understanding, we're looking at daylight from the ultraviolet or UV rays and the infrarays. These are extremely and critically important for maintaining our humanness and our life. In design and architecture, we seem to only be concentrating on the visible light portion, here represented as bands of energy and color. But in fact, natural daylight has the entire broad spectrum. And we need this to support our lifespan and our health and our reproductive values. The sun is the primary energy source. So when we keep thinking about daylight as something that's visual, we need to get over that. We need to climb over that hurdle and realize that sun is energy. It's the gas as if we were a car. It's what turns on the electricity in our house. It's a power source. And it's the power source for every biological being on our planet. And the IR, UV, and visible contain vital information. Our eyes, we're not designed to look at the sun. We're designed to use the sun and the information contained within every one of the wavelengths. What I have here is an example of daylight. And you'll see the dynamic nature because this is measuring 5,000 CCT, or a Kelvin approximate, at noon. And you can see the various wavelengths, the blue being the more higher energy and the red being a longer wavelength. Thus, the energy distribution is not as powerful. This is the same shot, but taken in the morning hours. This represents a snippet of time, a millisecond of time, around 10 a.m. in the morning. And it varies throughout the day continually. So when you think that, oh, I'm going to substitute daylight by putting a 5,000 or 6,500 CCT electric or artificial light source in a building, you're missing the boat, folks, because daylight changes. And we, as human beings, need continual changes. Now, back in the 1970s, we understood that daylight was important, but it wasn't up until the mid to late 1990s that we understood specifically that a middle portion of the daylight, particularly in the bandwidths that are categorized here between the blues and the greens, are really the most stimulating for our biology. So, because human beings are, capitalistic by nature, manufacturers started designing light sources going, yeah, I'm going to design an LED or a fluorescent tube that says I mimic daylight here. And they missed the mark totally. So what was designed, even now, are light spectral power distributions, a representation of what that light is coming out of the electric source. And you can see in the background, neither of those two match what the sun's producing. As we spend more and more of our time indoors, we need to get away from the inaccurate and incomplete electric light sources and spend more time outdoors or in front of windows. Just as if one of the women on the interview on the street said that her children spend more and more time in front of the window because they seem to do better in school, that's right. Test of a friend of mine, Naomi Miller, did one of the first tests and scientific research on daylight for office workers through windows, and showed with 30,000 children that standardized tests for math and reading went up dramatically. Math by 20% and reading by 26% simply by having those children in classrooms that had exposure to windows and skylights. That was the most critically salient point, the skylight. So here's some definitions that you probably didn't hear about. Sunlight. When we think of daylight, we go, oh yeah, that's the light coming in. Well, sunlight is the orb, and the eye is not designed to look at the orb. It's designed to use the information in the orb. And it's the same thing with LED light bulbs. We're not designed to look at it. We're designed to use it. The sun puts out 1.6 billion candela per meter square. An LED puts out 150 million candela per meter square. That's 1/10 the brightness of the sun. Our eyes are only designed to tolerate 50,000 candela per meter square. Sky dome, that's where we get our daylight from.
from horizon line to horizon line. Literally, from as far as we can see, from side to side and up above. Everything in our path, that's what we get out of daylight. And we can't get that through windows. You can only get it from above. Now, I'm going to explain why biologically there's a difference, and we need both. When we try to translate natural daylight through an interior environment, and we're having fenestrations with different solar transmissions to try to reduce the heat, but yet still allowing, we're going to lose the IV and most of the UR. So we're relying specifically on just the visible portion. That portion from about 380 to about 720, 730 nanometers. All of the multiple colors that I showed you in the diagram earlier. But in a built environment, this would be the sky dome from here to here, and that encompasses the walls, the ceiling, any ceiling treatment you have. Everything from the floor line up is sky dome. So even though outside you go from horizon line to horizon line, on the interior it's sky dome. So when you're designing a space, we need to consider the colors of the wall, the reflectivity of the floor, everything that is contributing a photon of light reflected back into our body through the skin, our closed eyelids, and our eyes themselves. We'll have a presenter later today who will explain the differences between the energy contained within the different colors, the spectrum of that light. And there's a difference between top daylighting and side daylighting, which I'll explain in a second. But top daylighting is anything that light is distributed, whether it be modular systems, skylight, or tubular devices in the ceiling plane. And of course, side daylighting is everything that comes from the side. So those are the terms I'm going to be using interchangeably today. So how does daylight work? Well, we've already talked about the IV, UR, and visible. They all contain and provide vital energetic stimuli. Just like when you pop a drug, it's a stimulant. When you take some coffee, when you have a drink, when you smoke a joint, it's a stimuli. Light is a stimulus, and it's dynamic. It changes based on your age, your health condition, the time of day you receive the light, and how you receive the light. And light is like a drug. Actually, in medical and scientific realm, we're now considering light is a drug. And it has the same benefits and properties as pretty much any pharmaceutical out there. So here's a basic soup's kitchen type of explanation. So you have daylight, and you have the visual spectrum. And contained within this clear blue, sky that has a little minimal cloud cover are all of these energy bands that are represented. The eye is receiving light in two different types of information packets. The information packet is coming in, and it's going to two different portions of the eye. The first packet of information is coming in, and it's entering in through the eye, through the structures within the eye, and hitting the back part of the brain that's called the retina. And yes, the retina of the eye is comprised of brain neuronal cells. It's the only part of our body that's outside the cranial area. So light comes in the cones and the rods. And by the way, the rods are not just there to get you in the dark. The rods are there to determine motion. That's their job. So that when the light naturally changes, the rods in your eyes are picking this up. And when we're under artificial light, the light doesn't change. It stays like the chandelier in the middle of our space. It's not changing. It's static throughout the day. Now, when the eye is picking up visual information, it's going to be hitting the back. It's going to go through 7 different steps through the eye, in the brain, and specifying different areas within the back of the brain before it goes up to the parietal lobe, so that you go, oh, everybody has on red tags or a salmon-colored shirt or a gray striped shirt. Whereas when we're getting the information for the biological input of information from light, it's going to one-stop shop. About this far back, right between the two eyes, right back behind the nose. And from there, the light information travels down to the superior ganglion nerve, back up on a circuitous fashion through the pineal gland, and is distributed through a number of other systems throughout the body. And the one we're going to talk about later in just a few minutes is the circadian system. And light is a biological stimulant. So when we look at colors and changing sky, we go, oh, that's simple. All we have to do is change the color of our light bulbs. That's not it. You're missing the game, folks. Light has information, and that information has spectral qualities to it and specific qualities that are listed here. We have the intensity. It's the percentages of all the IR and UV and light, and it's also the timing. When does this light appear? When does it go away? When is it showing up at all? And if it's even there in our interior environment, the duration. How long does a specific wavelength and group of wavelengths stay prominent or dominant? And when does that start to dissipate and the other wavelengths, particularly the longer red wavelengths, appear? And the location. It's always consistent natural daylight with the sun and the rotation of seasonality. But in our buildings, the light is like right there. That's it. It doesn't change. And we wonder why 60% of our health problems are directly attributable to the environment. Because it lacks motion. It doesn't do anything. It's just there. And the so-called human-centric lighting that supposedly changes, all it's doing is changing color. And color is not the game. What we're looking at is the energy. So here's a little test. This is night. So those of you that are familiar with correlated color temperature or Kelvin temperature, the engineers and the researchers in the room. So if I were to ask you what color temperature of light is coming, would it be 5,000, 6,500? Would it be cool white? Would it be warm white? What would you say? Who thinks it's warm white coming out of this light? If this were an actual nighttime shot, how would you describe this light right here? How would you describe that? Would that be cool white or warm white? Cool white. Well, when we look at it photometrically and from the perspective of the body, that light is heavily weighted in long wavelength. It's because the light, you can't depend on the color that we think we see. The body's using the information. So when we design light, and light at night is actually measured at 4125 Kelvin. So when we design an electric light source for it, that's what we get. Does that look anything at all like that? So, I'm going to talk about the circadian system. And we've known about the circadian system for hundreds of years, but we'd never had a title for it. We knew that as the sun comes up across the sky dome and it changes angles, we knew that it was responsible for destroying DNA on purpose. It's called photomelanometabolism. It destroys our skin DNA so that later, 12 hours later, vitamin D3 can occur in the liver, then can produce a gene that's going to crosstalk to that biological clock that we have behind our eye, that's going to allow us to function, to have muscle strength in the morning, to relax at night, limit our ability to get up to pee at night, and a host of other things that we consider human. And it's the moving path of that daylight that determines. And without this correctly timed, spectrally distributed, optimized directionality of light, we develop breast cancer and obesity, metabolism and metabolic syndrome. We basically get sick. And the circadian system, everyone falsely thinks that, oh yeah, that's our rhythm, that's our circadian rhythm. You guys don't have a clue. Circadian rhythm is our biological operating system. Just like you have a Windows, or you have a Mac, you have an operating system. The circadian system is our human biological operating system, and it's present in every cell, including our red blood cells, that they don't even have a nucleus. And they have a biological clock in it. Every cell has little subservient cells that report to this one major clock right back here. And it comes in through the eyes. And it's supported through the daylight we receive in our skin. Its purpose is to anticipate and monitor the environment, and we are biologically responsive to the daily rhythm and the seasonal rhythms of light and dark as it goes 24 hours around the rotation. But the circadian rhythm, yeah, that's part of the circadian system, but it operates differently. It's 24.2 hours. So it's important that we benchmark it, we calibrate it somehow and turn it back to the beginning. And the only way we do that is if we're exposed to natural daylight, because it's recalibrated twice naturally by getting exposure to the light coming from outside. Our heartbeat, our blood pressure, our immune response, muscle coordination, hormonal regulation, and metabolic functioning, our sleep-wake cycle and wound healing are all determined by the amount of daylight we receive. Who knew? And sleep is the driver of all of this. It may come as a surprise, but sleep starts in the morning. It's the sleep process, about 2 hours before you get up in the morning so that you can sleep at night. That's the active sleep. It's called the homeostatic sleep propensity, and here's how it works. So here's how the circadian rhythm is calibrated with the circadian system with the rotation of the earth. So in the morning when we wake up, right in through here, our circadian rhythm is high. And it dips precipitously throughout the day so that by about 10, 11 o'clock, it's at its low point. It's nadir. Conversely, we have sleep pressure, the need to sleep. If you get a good night's sleep, you don't need to go back immediately to bed. That's pressure. It's the pressure that builds up throughout the day. And it builds up with a chemical called adenosine. It's our main energy currency of our body. And if it doesn't get exposed, our body and our eyes, to daylight, we don't produce adenosine, and we constantly feel tired throughout the day. The recalibration occurs between the hours of 1 and 3, and also right between the hours of about 10 and 12 for adults, and 2 and 4 for all population age groups. How light gets in, how it impacts health, well, it comes in through the eyes. As I mentioned before, it enters the skin, it enters the eyes, and prioritized by those 3 receptor types. Visual acuity, again, is processed in the back of the head, right back here, has to go through 7 different steps. And the light that comes for biological impact is right here, very close to the surface of our skin, right behind the nose. And what it's doing, it's juggling. It's directing the brain to distribute hormones, neurotransmitters, the chemicals that make us feel good, the chemicals that turn us from a child into a young adult to a man, the chemicals that allow us to become fertile and to carry a child to term, the physiological and the functional aspect of our brain and our body, our mood, our behavior, and again, our sleep. So when we think and talk about daylighting, producing children who do better on standardized tests or employees who work faster or harder, it's actually through the vehicle of sleep that we're able to justify and prove how daylight works. And we have to look at the daylight that we don't even see. Here is an example of the horizon line sunlight, but all of this occurs below the horizon line that we don't see, but the body picks up. Here's an example using sleep. It's a biological process that starts about 2 hours before you get up. Because at 2 hours before you get up, the light is about 6 degrees below the horizon line. And these are the chemicals. It's quieting the release of melatonin, increasing serotonin, and increasing cortisol. The sky dome, once it passes the horizon line, the light that's up and through here all throughout the day, it's the bright vertical surfaces in our architectural buildings and our top daylighting strategies that enable our body process through sleep to increase adenosine and decrease melatonin. You want to get rid of melatonin during the day and force it to come out at night. When our light levels go below the horizon, starting between 6 all the way extending to 12 degrees below the horizon, another set of chemicals occur. And those chemicals are acquainted with what we like to say firelight type of light. That light that you can't see the sun, but the sky is still glowing long and red and pink. That's because it is quieting distribution of tryptophan and serotonin and cortisol. It's purposely relaxing you. At night, when it gets 18 degrees below the horizon line and the sky is dark blue, just like that picture I saw, but yet the body is still reading long wavelengths, this is when it's producing melatonin to come out from the pineal gland. And melatonin, everyone thinks it's 100% the only chemical, the only thing it does is get you to sleep. Well, that's wrong. That's way down on the list. The first priority of melatonin is a DNA protectorant, and it suppresses tumors. We've got millions of tumors all the time in our body circulating. Right now, you do, you've got millions of tumors. But they don't metastasize. They don't initiate into full-blown problems because of melatonin. So the idea is to get as much natural melatonin you can. And the only way to do that is to get daylight and get exposed. Biological stress occurs when we don't live by the sun. And it directly impacts our genes, disrupts our endocrine system, and a number of host of other problems. Organizations, American Academy of Sleep Medicine, World Health Organization, and NASA are all concerned because it impacts genes, brains, energy levels, blood pressure, heart level, and particularly the adrenal glands. They're located back here, the kidneys, and on top of the kidneys are the adrenal glands. And when I look at bodies that are stressed, the fat that is produced is bright orange, just like the lanyards you have on your neck. That's the color of the fat. And fat is supposed to look either white and creamy like butter or brown, a real pretty shade, almost like the shade of my sweater. It's not supposed to be orange. And the digestion, fat distribution, energy levels, and of course sleep is impacted. And we wonder why people are getting heavier and heavier. Because they're looking at their phones at night. They're turning on their light bulbs overhead at night instead of allowing low-level light, below the horizon line imitators, to illuminate our spaces at night. And our sleep, that's going by the wayside. Endocrine disruption. That's what we look at when we test new pharmaceuticals. Anything that's going to affect the function of the endocrine system, our neurotransmitters and our hormones, that's a problem. Light as a drug is now falling into that category. So here's how it works. Light changes between light and dark. Specific sets of genes pay attention. They communicate to the circadian system that, of course, controls your heart rate, your blood pressure, your muscles, wound healing, immune function. That then sets off the different neurotransmitters and hormones. That turns on another set of genes, and we have our ability to get up in the morning and go to sleep at night. When we mess it up, we have diabetes. In the US, 29 million people. We have autoimmune disease, cancer. 40,000 people in the US die every day from cancer, and Alzheimer's. 47 million people in the world right now have Alzheimer's. In the next 10 years, that's expected to almost triple. Obesity, 68% in 2010 was the US obesity level. By 2025, it's going to be 87%. Europe is higher than that. And by the way, my BMI is about 23 right now. Overweight is 25. Obese is this far out. That's how we categorize obese. So keep that in mind, because when you are obese, that means you have a higher collection of orange fat, and it's killing you. Sleep. This is how we need to understand our lighting and our design of our buildings. We need to promote sleep. Sleep's a two-step component. And we need to look at the difference between side daylighting and top daylighting. For side daylighting, In other words, windows, fenestrations, glass fenestrations. When we look out and we see something, particularly nature, that's located at 12 to 20 feet beyond, it's going to release a specific gene called ZIF268 that 12 to 16 hours later is going to impact the way that you dream at night. It's called REM sleep. And when you dream at night, it's going to pare back your neuronal, your brain connection, so that in the morning you feel energized, you feel alert. Fatigue is a thing of the past, and you're going to perform better at work, on the test, and you're going to do what the body does, which is protect itself by defeating tumors and protect the DNA. Top daylighting, that's much better. Because with side daylighting, you have problems. You have glass that's maybe not specified correctly, you have filtration systems, but in most cases, you have window shadings or curtaining that is literally obscuring the daylight. You can't look out, or it's being distorted. Plus the fact that depending upon your window to wall ratio, the daylight penetration is minimal. You're literally eliminating the daylight benefit to a good portion of the individuals in the room. When you have top daylighting, several things happen. It's not that you're going to see the sun up here, because it's very rare you'll see the sun itself. You'll see the sky dome change color. But what's more important on this picture is the fact that it's lighting the vertical surfaces and it's moving across the floor. And the problem, when architects and engineers and illuminating engineers that don't understand the human connection, they fail to realize that here's the natural light coming in, and when they have to augment with electric light throughout the space, it's not coordinated. That causes a problem for the individual working in that environment. So I'm going to wrap up because unfortunately I have about 3 slides left, and my time is up. So do I finish or do I continue? Continue? Okay. Is that a consensus? I have just a few more slides. So the vertical surface illumination, the dynamic motion, and the biologically correct spectra, which Katia is going to explain later during the presentation. It's all doing something, and that's eliciting a neuroendocrine response. And what's the incentive for you as an architect or engineer to sell your client on natural daylight from the top? Well, it's easy. It's money. Actual hard-earned cash and productivity. Simply by allowing the occupants to have exposure to daylight that gives them 46 more minutes of sleep every night, of quality sleep. Who knew? And 1 more hour of sleep translates into productivity of $1,967 per employee per year. That speaks volumes to the bottom line. And it's also that perception of ceiling height that a top daylighting solution provides, because any ceiling that appears or is over 12 feet in height, again, impacts specific structures in the brain that allow for enhanced cognition and physical performance. So here's an example of a real project in the US. And the company decided to install tubular daylight devices on one side of the office and leave the existing lighting on the other. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. Who do you think is going to be the worker that's the most tired in that light? Yeah. How much light? Well, we're still debating that. Scientists, medical researchers, we're still debating exactly how much light. But what we know is that the vast majority of individuals, researchers and scientists, can agree that a minimum of 1,250 lux is ideal, and we have to understand that the majority of that light needs to be in front of us and on the sides, and natural daylight provides that. The daylight that does come in from the side, and remember, top daylighting, it's not about light on the ceiling, it's about light on that sky dome. That's what we need, and that's where we get that 1250 lux. We need the extended light from dawn to dusk, the duration, the broad dynamic patterns, the shadow, that's the motion, and the biologically correct CCT and power percentages, that's the spectrum. And this is the last slide that I'm going to share with you today, because this is the most groundbreaking slide. Everyone here, worth their design salt, understands the problem associated with glare, but very few people understand glare. So when we have a side daylighting situation, we have a problem for the individuals, because if they're not in the daylight zone, they're in biological darkness if it's not augmented with electric light. And the person that is seated by the window, in most cases, has window blades or shades pulled down to protect from the glare. Harvard study in 2014 found that if we can eliminate glare, we get quicker reaction times, we're less sleepy, and we have fewer attention lapses. And glare is exacerbated by light intrusion of higher luminous intensity. Basically, if the light's coming in from a window and it's brighter than your wall color or the light that you have on the ceiling, you're going to experience glare. The sensation of discomfort that we feel is actually a photostress response. It's not a sensation at all. It's accumulation of cellular waste behind the retina. That's the reason why you go, oh, that hurts. Or I got a headache. I can't look at this computer any longer, because you're looking at the light. Remember, your eyes are not designed to look at light. They're designed to use it. The computer is a glare source. And it's cellular waste that builds up behind the eye that makes you go, oh, it hurts my eyes. And that glare buildup occurs on this layer right here, the epithelial layer, all throughout the back of the eye. And it impacts a number of other stress responses because of the fact that it comes in through the same biological pathway as our biological light, the IPRG cells. It comes in, it then initiates a neuroepinephrine pathway response that travels from the brain down to the kidneys, up to the adrenal glands, all the way around up to the thymus gland. That's what happens every time you go, oh, that light's glary. That headlight coming at me at night hurts. It involves all of this. It's a physiological stress response. And it's also impacting your sleep. Every time you have a glare situation in your office, your home, driving at night, looking at your computer screen, you have many stress responses occurring simultaneously. And we need more light as we age. And I'm way past my time, so please feel comfortable to address any questions that I have. I'll be here. And unfortunately, all I can say in Slovenian at this point is good afternoon and hvala. That's it.